All right. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I know it's been a good long while, but recently I built my first custom mechanical keyboard, and I wanted to show it off to you guys and hopefully show you guys why building customs is definitely worth it. This cost me about $200, give or take maybe a little bit. I think less, a little bit less, but in the grand scheme of things, that's actually pretty inexpensive as far as custom keyboards go. But I find it 100% worth it, and I hope to show you guys why I think it's 100% worth it. So let's get into it. For anyone new to keyboards, mechanical keyboards, or anybody who hasn't heard about people building their own, I just want to give you a quick introduction into why that is a thing. We all use keyboards pretty much every day, whether it's for gaming or for work or whatever, right? With it being something we use constantly, it only makes sense that a good amount of people want something a little more comfy or luxurious to use, which is where custom building comes in. You see, back when keyboards were a new thing, they were all pieces of tech that were supposed to last a long time and be something that you were happy to have. With the obvious explosion of computers in households, the keyboard became more of an afterthought for the average consumer, and manufacturers turned to cheaper materials in order to make and sell more, which is where the membrane keyboards come in. If you use a keyboard and you don't really know what it is, odds are it is covered in tons of little rubber bubbles under the keycap, which is called it's called a membrane keyboard. When everything got super mass produced, manufacturers started turning to membrane keyboards. All those little rubber bubbles, they have a little tactile feeling. You push it down, the bubble goes, and it makes a thing in the computer. But they're kind of obviously squishy and not very satisfying to press, and they don't sound too hot either. So that's where the mechanical keyboard enters the fray. Mechanical keyboards use little plastic switches that have moving parts and springs. This gives your inputs a much more tactile and responsive feel, and it also has the ability to generate plenty of satisfying or dissatisfying sounds, depending on your taste. And that's the main difference between these types of keyboards. It's mostly just the switch. There's other components such as like silicone dampening and what material the case is made out of, and other things that affect the sound and feel of it. But the main difference in your usage is going to be the switch. And I promise I'm getting to why you want to build custom here. So for my first keyboard build, I spent a few hours doing something that I recommend that every single person does. Whether you're building a keyboard or you have hot swap switches, it is lubing the switches. Now, I have very little footage of me and my girlfriend actually lubing the switches, because honestly, we just turned on a show for a few hours and just relaxed and lubed up the switches. But I ended up going with Novelkey cream switches, which are just a fancy linear switch, and that means that basically when you press down on the switch, there's no bumps or clicks or anything. The lube I got on Amazon is this Krytox G205 grade 0 stuff, and it works perfectly. Basically, all I did was pop open the little switch housing, and I painted some lube onto the main points of friction within the switch. Then I closed it back up and repeated it about 70 times. Easily the most boring part, but easily the most rewarding. After all that was done, it came down to just putting the stuff into the board. Now, I went with the NK65 Entry Edition, this purple board here. It's from Novelkeys. It cost me about $95, but it was very beginner friendly, as it has a hot swap PCB, which is the little thing that does all the electronics, and basically all I had to do was just push the switches into the board and then put the keycaps on, and it made my experience really easy. There was no soldering on switches to make sure they would be compatible. If you want to do a first time build, I highly recommend going with a board like this, as it is the easiest way to get into the hobby rather than having to know a ton of different compatibility aspects of all these small parts and having to figure out how to mix and match them. Now that I got all my lube switches all pressed into the board, all I had to do is just start layering on all the keycaps. I went with a pretty inexpensive, because it was a budget build, obviously, I went with a pretty inexpensive set of keycaps that I also found on Amazon from a company called Taihao. They're ABS, which is the plastic. It's a little softer plastic. They're navy blue. I thought they'd look awesome with the purple board. So I was starting to feel how good the lube switches actually, and trust me, I will gush about this soon, but how good they actually were. But once you're done shoving all the keycaps and the switches into the board, it's a smart idea to use a software to test the keys. I use a software called VIA. It's just to make sure everything's operational. And I ended up, when testing my keys here, as you could see, there was a hiccup with the R key on my board. And the switch was, it turned out the switch pin, because there's multiple little pins under the switch that make it be compatible with the board. One of them was bent. So I needed to move on to a new switch, and luckily I had 2 extras. Unfortunately, it seemed I hadn't fully closed the switch housing, and this switch that I put in snapped into the board, breaking as it went in. Kind of panicked, but after about 10 minutes of digging with tweezers, I was able to get it out of the board. With my final switch, I very nervously lined up the pins and slowly pushed in, and to my excitement, it went in and responded in the key tester. I was freaking out. If I broke that last extra switch I had, and I had to wait for a whole new set of switches to get one switch for my first build, I would have lost my mind. All set and done, this is the keyboard I built. It feels incredibly good, and I'll see what I can do to try and maybe get a sound test. This mic isn't super sensitive, so I don't know if I'll be able to get sounds that quiet, but it is absurd how good it feels to use a custom board that obviously has a very high quality case. The switches are very nice. The lubed switches just feel absurdly good to use. It's just the most luxurious feeling. And I love sitting down at my desk every day and touching it. It's crazy. I can't express how crazy it is and how amazing it feels to use. But the other advantage to it is also I have a custom piece on my desk that I built, and I get the satisfaction knowing that I built it, you know? And that's pretty neat. It feels great to sit down and use something that you built and has that attachment to you, right? Because you made it and nobody else has this board. All that being said, I'm obviously super happy with how it turned out, and I highly recommend everyone build their own if they care about their keyboard in the slightest. I'm going to link everything I purchased in the description, including the lube and the little switch opener too. I needed to grab that as well. Couldn't open switches. And I'll be back with another video soon. I will definitely do another keyboard video in the future. Probably isn't the next one, obviously. They're kind of pricey. But I will be back with a keyboard build video in the future. And I will be back with some sort of video soon, because I want to start making videos. So thank you for watching so much, everybody. And I will see you next time. Peace.